Have you been stressed, anxious, or worried? Have you felt pangs of loneliness in recent times? Are you longing for greater connection with others in the world around you? In a phrase, are you looking for happiness? You are not alone. Millions of others are seeking this feeling of spiritual, mental, and physical wellness too. This podcast explores the underlying causes of unhappiness and shares with us the secrets of rewriting the frequent thoughts and redirecting the common behaviors that keep us in that state. Join forensic psychologist and best-selling author Dr. Neehall and her guests as they dive deep in the realm of psychological wellness and explore ways of finding happiness on demand.
Today, it's my pleasure and privilege to explore polarization with you. Recently, I was asked an important question. Is there a difference in age groups and polarization? Does it affect our age groups differently? And I thought, you know what? That's a great question. Let's look at children and adolescents. This group is highly sensitive to social cues. When they grow up in polarized environments at home, in school, and online, they may internalize hostility and an us versus them thinking. Research shows that prolonged exposure to political and cultural conflict increases anxiety in youth, and it lowers their sense of safety. Bullying and social exclusion rise in political climates, harming self-esteem and belonging, which, by the way, are key elements for adolescent happiness. Now, young adults ages 18 to 29 spend the most time online, where polarization is amplified by algorithms. They often experience outrage fatigue and increased stress. Twenge and al. In 2018 found that heavy social media use correlates with rising rates of loneliness and depression in young adults. Constant exposure to divisive debates reduces life satisfaction and increases anxiety, especially when identity and belonging are still in the formative stages. Adults between the ages of 30 to 59 often experience polarization in family and in workplace settings. This is the stage where people may lose friendships or strained family ties over differences. Social conflict and lack of community trust are linked to lower subjective well-being in adults. Since happiness in midlife relies strongly on social bonds and meaning, polarization erodes both, fueling stress, burnout, and loneliness. Now, with older adults ages 60 and over, they probably consume more traditional media, which can heighten polarization through repetitive partisan messaging. So while older adults tend to regulate emotions better, studies show that political polarization still increases isolation and distrust. Isolation is especially damaging for older adults. Loneliness predicts depression. Yes, it's the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Loneliness predicts cognitive decline and reduced happiness, as evidenced in the work by Holt, Lunsden, and others in 2015. So there are universal effects across all ages. Polarization erodes trust. Communities become less cooperative and supportive. It shrinks empathy by increasing hostility and decreasing compassion. It increases stress, since prolonged exposure to conflict raises cortisol, the stress hormone. It lowers happiness and health, physical health in particular. Finally, it weakens a sense of belonging. And we are wired in our DNA for connection. We're social beings. Division cuts to the core of our well-being. So for children, polarization harms development of empathy and a sense of belonging. For young adults, It drives online stress and loneliness. For middle-aged adults, it fractures relationships and increases stress. For older adults, it heightens isolation and distrust. So in every stage of life, polarization reduces happiness by undermining the foundations of well-being, namely connection, trust, and compassion. So I would invite you now to think of a family dinner. Think of being at a family dinner table. Maybe not yours, but just humor me for a moment and think about it. One person mentions politics, and then suddenly the room goes quiet. You can hear a pin drop. Eyes narrow, voices rise, and the warmth that was there moments ago evaporates. That's polarization at work. Not just in politics, but in our relationships, in our communities. It's all around us, polarization. It tears our society apart. It's also making us less happy. Esther Perel, a noted psychologist and psychotherapist, recently pointed out that polarization is even creeping into the way we parent. Ed Diener and Marty Seligman in 2002 showed that the strongest predictor of happiness isn't wealth, fame, and achievements. No, guess what it is? Social connection. You guessed right. The problem is that polarization eats away at those social connections. Because when we label others as us versus them, trust erodes. And social fragmentation leads to lower life satisfaction and weaker communities. Think for a moment about scrolling through social media. Instead of joy, we might often feel tension, outrage, or exhaustion, or maybe a combination of all of the above, and then some more. Research shows that exposure to divisive rhetoric increases or elevates stress hormones like cortisol. Chronic distress reduces happiness, resilience, and takes its toll on our physical health, not just our mental, but our physical health as well. Sakara and Fiske found that polarization activates tribal thinking, which literally reduces empathy towards outgroups. Adult compassion and kindness are the best ways I know of to create joy. That's what the research points out. Just a bit of empathy and a bit of kindness makes a huge difference. Because while polarization shrinks compassion, it also takes its toll on our happiness quotient. So what do we do about that? In psychology, we have solutions. I've talked about why it's happening. Now let's go into the how. How do we fix this? And I turn to psychology. Gordon Allport pointed out contact theory and contact therapy way back in 1984, and others have jumped on this. So with contact therapy, think, what does it do? It'll boost kindness, because what you do is you think of one person you might disagree with and have structured, meaningful contact with that person or members of an opposing group. When you have structured, meaningful contact, that contact theory comes into play and polarization reduces. Just putting ourselves in another's shoes increases empathy, which boosts both kindness and happiness. So think of a person you might disagree with. Right now, think. Instead of trying to change them, try asking yourself, what life experiences might have let them see the world this way? This single shift reduces anger and increases compassion. I had a client once who was estranged from his son because they argued. What did they argue about? Politics. And he stopped speaking to his son for years, even though the son's home was a block away from his. For years, that continued. And one day, my client showed up at his son's doorstep with a simple sentence: I miss you more than I disagree with you. Look, they reconnected. That one act of compassion didn't just heal a relationship, it brought back joy. Polarization eats away at our happiness by building walls. And walls, as we know, just wall us in. I guess they fence us in. But every time we use connection, compassion, and curiosity, we start building bridges. And happiness resides and lives in bridges, not in walls. So let's now move from polarization into something else. What else can we do? Evidence-based actions are the ones that we can use to reduce polarization and increase happiness at the same time. Here are a couple. Strengthen bridging conversations with people you might disagree with. Have a calm, curious conversation with the person you disagree with. Start by asking, help me to understand a little bit more about how you see it this way. Meaningful interaction across divides reduces prejudice and increases empathy. Listening without judgment builds connection, which is a key predictor of happiness. I like using curiosity. I get my clients to use curiosity because it's like a hot knife through butter. It really works. Look at perspectives. For instance, when you feel anger towards someone who disagrees with you, stop and ask, what experiences might have let them get to this viewpoint? What led them to it? I'm curious. Another thing that really helps is if you can, all of us, including myself, diversify our information diet. Read or watch media from across the spectrum instead of staying in echo chambers. Exposure to varied viewpoints reduces polarization and encourages more complex thinking. A broader perspective will lower stress and increase tolerance, helping relationships to thrive. And how about acts of kindness across divides? Lubomirsky talks about it in her research. Do a small act of kindness for someone you disagree with. For example, buy coffee, help with a task. Lubomirsky found that regular acts of kindness will increase our happiness and well-being. Kindness builds trust and softens divisions while giving us an emotional boost. So it's a win-win. And how about focusing on shared identities by emphasizing what unites rather than what divides? For instance, we're both parents, we both love the city, we love our country, whatever. Highlighting shared common interests and common identities reduces group hostility. Shared identity restores belonging. Remember, we talked about connection, which is crucial for happiness. I like to say, we all need to limit doom scrolling and avoid inflammatory comment sections. So, instead of that, share uplifting bridge building stories. Excessive social media is linked to anxiety, stress, and polarization. But curating your digital environment will protect your mood and foster connection. Think of one person you've avoided because of differences. This weekend, send that person a message, not to debate, but to connect. Try a simple segue such as, or an email or a message saying, I was thinking of you and I hope you're doing well. That can rebuild a bridge. And remember, happiness is contagious. It's infectious. So when you extend connection, we don't just lift our own well-being, we lift theirs too. So allow me to give you an exercise that I use with my clients. Take a deep breath. Think of someone you disagree with strongly. Could be about politics, culture, or even within your family. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to have you debate with them. Just hold that person in mind right now. Now, you might want to put a pause in a moment on this podcast and answer these questions. What life experiences might have led them to their beliefs? Imagine walking in their shoes. What worries or hopes might they carry? What are they trying to protect or preserve? And here I would definitely recommend we pause the recording or the listening to this podcast for a good 30 seconds so that you can reflect. Notice how your feelings shifted ever so slightly when you see the person as a whole human being instead of just the other side. Now think for a moment, what do we share? Maybe it's that you both care about your children, your community, or even just that you both want a good life. Take a moment to identify one thing you have in common. Finally, imagine sending them a message that says, I may not agree with you, but I value our connection. Another message could be, from your point of view, I get it completely. Notice the sense of relief or warmth that will bring. That is happiness being rebuilt, reconstructed, not through winning an argument, but through choosing compassion, curiosity, and connection. Above all, curiosity. Now, I'd like to turn our attention to Alyn Edwards, who might want to ask us some questions. Alyn?
Hello.
Hi.
Well, I've been listening with great interest, and I can't think of a better time to have a discussion about what divides us in polarization, because the political situation in the world is certainly dividing a lot of people, and particularly what is happening south of the border in the United States.
Yes.
And so when I was thinking about this, I was thinking of a very good friend of mine who lives just south of the border. I live in Vancouver. He lives in Bellingham. Guy that I really like. We're part of a club, international club, and we cannot talk politics, so we choose not to. And that really resonated with me when you talked about finding what unites us as opposed to what divides us, and focus on that. And in our own way, without not talking about politics, we choose not to, because we know that divides us or could divide us. And so what we talk about is what unites us, and that's the focus of the club we both belong to and our long-standing friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really resonated with me. Focusing on what unites us, avoiding topics that divide us. There is a lot of very left and very right polarization in the world today. I was a news reporter for 30 years, as you well know, Joan.
Yes.
And I have never seen a political situation like we have now in all parts of the world, not just the United States. And people are more polarized than I've ever seen them or heard them. People are really left or really right, and there doesn't seem to be much common ground. And people are not doing what you are suggesting they do, is work to find common ground. That's what politics used to do, but it doesn't do. And of course, in our own lives, we're being encouraged to dig in and not move on our positions, not find common ground. And to me, this is very disturbing, and it means to me that what you're talking about here, the way to handle this extreme polarization or any polarization has a methodology in psychology that can work. To hear you talk about someone who contacted someone that they have been distant from because of this polarization and opening up the conversation by saying, I miss you more than I disagree with you. That really resonated with me because people tend to avoid others that don't share their opinions. And with this extreme polarization that we have right now, largely fed by the media, it is a time where people could be very distant from people they care about. And of course, you've always said that we are in the midst of an epidemic of loneliness. And that epidemic of loneliness certainly causes unhappiness. And you're giving us a way around that. And I personally appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate your comments because it is true what you say. I mean, contact theory is so important and limiting doom scrolling. You see, one of the things that is different today as compared to the time of our grandparents even is the ready access to social media. It's there right across the world. Immediately you get information fed to you. And you know from your area of expertise as a news reporter what that means. If it bleeds, it reads. And unfortunately, people get fatigued. I mean, it increases cortisol. And we need to change that.
Well, yeah, and the attacks on the media, the legitimate media, the mainstream media is very disturbing to me. I actually met a person at a car show, and I was sitting beside him, and he informed me that you can't believe anything that you see or read in the news media. And I said, well, what do you base that on? He said, well, I base that on what I see on the internet, because a lot of what you see on mainstream media is debunked by what I read on the internet. And I said, well, I can tell you, I was a news reporter for 30 years, and I never said anything on television that I didn't truly believe was true. And I worked very hard to do my research. Well, he said that was then, this is now. And I said, I know a lot of reporters now that I would certainly feel that their integrity is upmost in their professionalism. And finally, I just said, well, I don't think you and I can carry on this discussion. And I moved away. So that's polarization. And I don't know how you find common ground with somebody who's that dug in, but that's the internet at work. And you absolutely nailed it. A lot of information is misinformation, and it is very divisive, and it is very polarizing, and therefore it's creating confusion, and confusion creates more division, and then that creates sadness, and that creates loneliness. How do you get around it? Well, you've given us a way forward on that, and that's very valid. What actually unites us as opposed to what divides us? That's what we should look for.
And the irony is that I've found with my own work with my clients, once they approach something like that with curiosity and empathy, it changes the perspective. Because remember, the issue is connection. Connection is what makes us happy. Polarization creates division, creates lack of trust. And while it is there, we can't say it doesn't exist. But what I'm hoping our listeners get from this today is a way to deal with it in practical terms in which we maintain our identity, we remain respectful of our ideas, and can respect the other as well. So we're running out of time now, Alyn, and I just want to thank you for your insight. And listeners, if you like this, you can find more from my book, Happy is the New Healthy. You can engage in the podcast, and more important, you can get a hold of me through joan@neehall.com. Share the podcast with others if you found it of use. Bye now.
Thank you for joining this discussion on happiness. We hope this helps to inspire you to lead a more joyful life. To dive deeper into the subject of happiness, be sure to check out Dr. Neehall's book, Happy is the New Healthy, available as an ebook or hardcover. For additional resources, visit our website at drneehall.com. Until next time, stay happy.